on the outside at all. The window was shut, and there was no door except the one that shut on the outside. Who ran this ark? Who took care of it? Finally it came down on Mount Ararat, a peak 17,000 feet above the level of the sea, and with about 3,000 feet of snow, and it stopped there simply to give the animals from the tropics a chance. Then Noah opened the window and got a breath of fresh air, and let out all the animals, and then Noah took a drink, and God made a bargain with him that he would not drown us any more. And he put a rainbow in the clouds, and said, "When I see that, I will recollect that I have promised not to drown you." Because if it was not for that, he is apt to drown us at any minute. Now, can anybody believe that that is the origin of the rainbow? Are you not all familiar with the natural causes which bring those beautiful arches before our eyes? Then the people started out again, and they were as bad as before. Here let me ask why God did not make Noah in the first place. He knew he would have to drown Adam and Eve and all his family. Then another thing, why did he want to drown the animals? What had they done? What crime had they committed? It is very hard to answer these questions. That is, for a man who has only been born once. After a while they tried to build a tower to get into heaven, and the gods heard about it and said, "Let's go down and see what man is up to." They came and found things a great deal worse than they thought, and thereupon he confounded the language to prevent them succeeding, so that the fellow up above could not shout down mortar or brick to the one below, and they had to give it up. Is it possible that anyone believes that that is the reason why we have the variety of languages in the world? Do you know that language is born of human experience and is a physical science? Do you know that every word has been suggested in some way by the feelings or observations of man, that there are words as tender as the dawn, as serene as the stars, and others as wild as the beasts? Do you know that language is dying and being born continually, that every language has its cemetery and its cradle, its bud and blossom and withered leaf? Man has loved, enjoyed, and suffered, and language is simply the expression he gives those experiences. Then the world began to divide, and the Jewish nation was started. Now I want to say that at one time your ancestors, like mine, were barbarians. If the Jewish people had to write these books now, they would be civilized books, and I do not hold them responsible for what their ancestors did. We find the Jewish people first in Canaan, and there were 70 of them, counting Joseph and his children already in Egypt. They lived 215 years, and they then went down into Egypt and stayed there 215 years. They were 430 years in Canaan and Egypt. How many did they have when they went to Egypt? 70. How many were they at the end of 215 years? 3 millions. That is a good many. We had at the time of the Revolution in this country 3 millions of people. Since that time there have been 4 doubles until we have 48 millions today. How many would the Jews number at the same ratio in 215 years? Call it 8 doubles and we have 40,000. But instead of 40,000 they had 3 millions. How do I know they had 3 millions? Because they had 600,000 men of war. For every honest voter in the state of Illinois there will be 5 other people, and there are always more voters than men of war. They must have had, at the lowest possible estimate, 3 millions of people. Is that true? Is there a minister in the city of Chicago that will testify to his own idiocy by claiming that they could have increased to 3 millions by that time? If there is, let him say so. Do not let him talk about the civilizing influence of a lie. When they got into the desert they took a census to see how many firstborn children there were. They found they had 20,273 firstborn males. It is reasonable to suppose there was about the same number of firstborn girls, or 45,000 firstborn children. There must have been about as many mothers as firstborn children. Dividing 3 millions by 45,000 mothers, you will find that the women in Israel had to have, on the average, 68 children apiece. Some stories are too thin. This is too thick. Now we know that among 3 million people there will be about 300 births a day, and according to the Old Testament, whenever a child was born, the mother had to make a sacrifice, a sin offering for the crime of having been a mother. If there is in this universe anything that is infinitely pure, it is a mother with her child in her arms. Every woman had to have a sacrifice of a couple of pigeons, and the priest had to eat those pigeons in the most holy place. At that time there were at least 300 births a day, and the priests had to cook and eat these pigeons in the most holy place, and at that time there were only 3 priests. 200 birds apiece per day. I look upon them as the champion bird eaters of the world. Then where were these Jews? They were upon the desert of Sinai, and Sahara compared to that is a garden. Imagine an ocean of lava torn by storm and vexed by tempest, suddenly gazed at by a Gorgon and changed to stone. Such was the desert of Sinai. The whole supplies of the world could not maintain 3 millions of people on the desert of Sinai for 40 years. It would cost 100,000 millions of dollars, and would bankrupt Christendom. And yet there they were with flocks and herds, so many that they sacrificed over 150,000 firstborn lambs at one time. It would require millions of acres to support these flocks, and yet there was no blade of grass, and there is no account of it raining baled hay. They sacrificed 150,000 lambs, and the blood had all to be sprinkled on the altar within 2 hours, and there were only 3 priests. They would have to sprinkle the blood of 1,250 lambs per minute. Then all the people gathered in front of the tabernacle 18 feet deep. 3 millions of people would make a column 6 miles long. Some reverend gentlemen say they were 90 feet deep. Well, that would make a column of over a mile. Where were these people going? They were going to the Holy Land. How large was it? 12,000 square miles, 1/5 the size of Illinois. A frightful country covered with rocks and desolation. There never was a land agent in the city of Chicago that would not have blushed with shame to have described that land as flowing with milk and honey. Do you believe that God Almighty ever went into partnership with hornets? Is it necessary unto salvation? God said to the Jews, I will send hornets before you to drive out the Canaanites. How would a hornet know a Canaanite? Is it possible that God inspired the hornets? That he granted letters of marque and reprisal to hornets? I am willing to admit that nothing in the world would be better calculated to make a man leave his native country than a few hornets attending strictly to business. God said, kill the Canaanites slowly. Why? Lest the beast of the field increase upon you. How many Jews were there? 3 millions. Going to a country, how large? 12,000 square miles. But were there nations already in this Holy Land? Yes, there were 7 nations mightier than the Jews. Say there would be 21 millions when they got there, or 24 millions with themselves. Yet they were told to kill them slowly, lest the beasts of the field increase upon them. Is there a man in Chicago that believes that? Then what does he teach it to little children for? Let him tell the truth. So the same God went into partnership with snakes. The children of Israel lived on manna. One account says all the time, and another only a little while. That is the reason there is a chance for commentaries, and you can exercise faith. If the book was reasonable, everybody could get to heaven in a moment. But whenever it looks as if it could not be that way, and you believe, you are almost a saint; and when you